and welcome. You're watching the NewsTrack. I'm Rahul. Kanwal. We are hours to go from when top world leaders will start landing one by one at the New Delhi International Airport. Will India's G20 be a big success, or will Russia and China's obstruction ensure that there is little to show at the end of it? The Indian negotiators quite confident that there will be a joint communique at the end and that there will be tangible outcomes from this Leaders Summit. Delhi is set, India is set, and India today is all set to get you the best coverage of the G20, and that's my top focus on the NewsTrack.
New Delhi all set for G20. Indian capital to host world leaders. The world's eyes are on Bharat. Biggest build-up to G20 summit. Namaste G20. Big focus on NewsTrack.
Let me take you through all the headlines we are tracking tonight. Prime Minister Modi back in the capital after a whirlwind tour of Jakarta. He headed straight to a review meeting of the G20 and is currently discussing with his ministers the last-minute details of the Leaders Summit. India today scores the first interview of a G20 head of state. Mauritius Prime Minister praises rising India, hails dosti, diplomacy and desi pride.
Well, the song Bharat Ka Rane Wala Hu by Mahendra Kapoor in the film of Pura Bachin, I think is very appropriate right now.
After Udayanidhi's talent, DMK MP A. Raja compared Sanatan Dharm to HIV and leprosy. Congress distances itself from the comment. Modi ministers demand apology from the India alliance. Tamil Nadu Chief Minister comes out in defense of his son, says Udayanidhi only spoke about inhuman principles of Sanatan. Protests rage on against Stalin Jr. Aditya L1 shares stunning selfie with the Earth and Moon from space. ISRO announces the mission has attained a new higher orbit around the Earth. The countdown to the big G20 summit has begun as we speak. Prime Minister Modi, who's just come back from Jakarta, is reviewing preparations and meeting his ministers. By this time tomorrow, the likes of US President Joe Biden, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and many of the other world leaders would have landed in the capital. Delhi is all set to say Namaste G20.
Illuminated, resurfaced, embellished. India set for the global carnival of geopolitics and economy. The world's most powerful en route to New Delhi for the G20 summit starting September 9th.
G20 is the 20th largest economy in the world, and not to mention also the largest number of population globally. So therefore, expectation is very high, especially on the G20 leadership and commitment on the on the most pressing development issues and challenges of our time. Everybody is looking forward to the outcome of the summit.
The capital city turned into an impregnable fortress. Uniformed personnel standing sentinel at every major intersection and thoroughfare. The skies above equally safeguarded, with fighter jets on standby. Surveillance drones patrolling the airspace. During his visit, US President Joe Biden will travel in the Beast, billed as the world's safest car. Being flown to India from the United States in a Boeing C-17 Globemaster III, jam-packed with features. The presidential vehicle with military-grade armor, a blast-proof fuel tank, oxygen tanks, firefighting gear, and even containers of the president's blood type. A fleet of bulletproof limousines guarantees the safe transit of other dignitaries. A quick response disaster management center in place for any emergency during the summit.
India is all set and decked up. You can see 5-star hotels, manicured lawns, national flag, murals and slogans and banners. Atiti Devo Bhava, that slogan, reverberating in everything that you see in the national capital. Moria Sheraton, of course, the pictures that you see, will be hosting the US President Joe Biden.
An emergency medical plan activated in the city. 4 of the key hospitals taken over by the army. A control room at each one of them in 24/7 contact with the main G20 venue and hotels for the VVIP guests.
यहाँ पर सारे वीआईपी डेलीगेट्स मतलब हेड ऑफ स्टेट्स के लिए भी तैयारी की गई है और जो बाकी डेलीगेट्स हैं उनके लिए भी हमने पूरा 40-50 बेड उन लोगों के लिए भी रिजर्व करके रखे हैं। उसके अलावा डिजास्टर मैनेजमेंट में बायोलॉजिकल डिजास्टर से निपटने के लिए भी हमारा हॉस्पिटल डेजिग्नेट हुआ है।
For city residents, authorities have set up special mobile police posts in order to facilitate filing of complaints and FIRs, especially in zone with tight restrictions during the G20 event.
ये देखिए, ये एक पायलट प्रोजेक्ट है जिसमें बस के अंदर थाना बनाने की कोशिश की गई है। ये आप देखिए, एक ड्यूटी ऑफिसर यहाँ पर मौजूद हैं जो सामने बैठी हैं, जो आमतौर पे हम देखते हैं कि दिल्ली पुलिस के जब हम थानों में जाते हैं दिल्ली के, तो वहां पर जिस तरीके से ड्यूटी ऑफिसर मौजूद होती हैं, इसके अलावा अलग अलग अधिकारी जिनका काम होता है थाने के अंदर, उस तरीके से बस के अंदर भी डिप्लॉय किए गए हैं, जो अपने काम को उसी तरीके से करेंगे जैसे वो थानों के अंदर अंजाम देते हैं। आप अपनी रिटन कंप्लेन दे सकते हैं, और चूंकि ये पायलट प्रोजेक्ट है, आगे पीछे चारों तरफ यहाँ पे सीसीटीवी कैमरे लगाए गए हैं, हुटर्स लगाए गए हैं, ताकि अगर भीड़ के इलाकों में जाता है तो इसे रास्ता मिलता रहे।
A city ready to welcome the world powers. A country embraces the global stage with the commitment to shape a brighter future for the planet. Bureau Report, India Today.
The venue for the G20 summit is the Bharat Mandapam in Delhi on the 9th of September. This is where the world's top leaders will be welcomed. It boasts of state-of-the-art facilities, including convention centers, exhibition halls, and an amphitheater, and it's all decked up for the big show.
On 26 July, Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurated the Bharat Mandapam flying a drone. With that, India got a brand new international convention centre. Spread across an approximate campus area of 123 acres, this majestic convention centre is going to be the nerve centre for the G20 summit.
This is where the final event of the G20 will take place. This is the Grand Summit meeting room, and these chairs made from Indian teak are meant for heads of states. 160 seating capacity in this entire giant hall, with, of course, the host country, India, and its Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, will be spearheading the G20 from this very hall. And as you can see, the mixture between the Indian and international cultures, another grand chandelier brought in from Czechoslovakia, juxtaposing with it the Indian style paintings that mark a significance and amalgamation of both Indian as well as international cultures.
Adorned with artwork from every state in India, It's a swanky, high-tech, ultra-modern convention centre, millennium-ready, yet steeped in ancient Indian heritage.
The depiction of yogasanas are the starting point of the entrance to the entire Bharat Mandapam at the Pragati Maidan, depicting India's cultural ethos related to yoga and International Yoga Day.
Each floor, each room has a distinct imprint of Indian art and culture.
This is the area on level 2 where the international dignitaries will come in, but they'll be welcomed by the Indian culture of 5 elements which India holds very dear in all its teachings. And in Devanagari written here, Akash, Vayu, Agni, Jal and Prithvi is the ethos of how India has kept its Indian heritage intact. And with this will begin the G20 pre-area summits where the dignitaries will follow to the main hall.
Building of Bharat Mandapam was started in October 2016. 7 years later, it stands as a pride of modern India.
Now, exhibitions and conventions go hand in hand. Whenever we have exhibitions, the exhibitors require a convention center, and wherever we have convention centers, they require, the participants require exhibition space. So this was missing. Now, with creation of this facility and Bharat Mandapam International Convention Center, we are able to address this gap, and we are able to pose this as an international convention center which is comparable to the best in the world. So this missing link has now been addressed.
And now we'll take you to level 3, which has a plenary hall as well as a multi-purpose hall made to equip at least 7,000 people all together for various cluster of events that can be held together at this very platform.
The Prime Minister himself has been supervising the construction, and his suggestions improved the centre further.
See, his focus has been on technology, and he said that wherever we have these artifacts and art buildings and all, we should have a QR code so that people just scan and come to know about that facility. Right. And now we are putting those QR codes at all these exhibits.
Yes, I did see them.
Yes.
Whether it's an outdoor amphitheatre or an indoor plenary hall, this Bharat Mandapam Convention Centre will be equipped with each and every technology that you see at the international level, whether it's Wi-Fi connectivity or QR code scanners. Even after the G20, the Convention Centre will continue to uphold India's international image of having an international state-of-the-art convention centres. With Ashok Banot in New Delhi, Milan Sharma for India Today.
At this moment, the Indian negotiators are confident that there will be a joint communique at the end of the G20 Leaders Summit, and that the Indian G20 will go down as one of the key G20s in the history of the G20. The other theory, of course, is that with China skipping, Russia staying away, the G20 itself is now irreversibly heading towards being less consequential than it has been since 2008. Remember, in the aftermath of the global American financial crisis, the G20 emerged as the numero uno global platform for economic decision making. Is that now changing? Will we be able to bring together a consensus? Remember, even in Bali in Indonesia, till the end it seemed that there would be no consensus. Because of the role played by many countries, notably India, there was a consensus in the end. What's the reading at the moment? I'm joined on this broadcast by Sujan Chunoy, former ambassador to Japan and Mexico, Director General of the Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis. We have with us Craig Kafura, Assistant Director for Public Opinion, Foreign Policy at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Andrew K.P. Luing joins us, China strategist and analyst from Beijing. Mohan Kumar is the former ambassador to France and Dean Strategic and International Initiatives at the O.P. Jindal University. Sujan Chinoy, I want to come to you first, sir. Given the fact that China is staying away, are you confident that the negotiators feeling that there will be a joint communique at the end is optimism based on solid reason? Or do you feel that given the obstructionist role China and Russia have played in every ministerial since the beginning of India's presidency, people should be realistic and just dial down expectations?
Well, thank you, Rahul, for having me on your show. Well, let me begin by saying that China is not staying away from the G20 summit. It's just that President Xi Jinping is not coming. And in my view, that's par for the course, because it's not the first time that leaders have stayed away from G20 summits. In Bali, there were 3 that were represented at the ministerial level. And in Rome in 2021, there were 6. So it's not uncommon for leaders to stay away from summits. So I think we are conflating unrelated matters here. The fact that Premier Li Qiang will be here, for me, is good enough in terms of representing China, because as a nation, China can be expected to take positions, whether at the level of Xi Jinping or Premier Li Qiang, that would really be more or less the same. And now, in terms of the outcomes, I would say that it is also not necessary to link the communique with judgment about India's G20 presidency. In my view, the G20 presidency of India is already a huge success, because it's been a year-long effort, innumerable meetings, and India has been able to not only represent the voice of the global South, but also has been very successful in putting front and center all the issues related to current challenges related particularly to macroeconomic stability, the democratization of digital public infrastructure, as also green transitions, climate change, reforms of multilateral institutions, etc. So we have spoken out on behalf of all the peoples of the world, especially on behalf of 1.4 billion people in India. And I'm quite hopeful that there will be an outcome statement. The G20 is a dream team, in my view. It's certainly not the UN Security Council. There are no privileged veto powers here or exceptionalism. But in a group that to me seems like a dream team, it's obvious that there can be what you call near consensus, if not 100% consensus. And so it's possible to draw issues out a little further, discuss them, and also accommodate to some extent differing views.
Amit Pal Chaudhary heads the India practice at the Eurasia Group. So John Chinoy sounding optimistic that there will be near consensus and that China and Russia, despite the absence of their heads of government, won't necessarily play an obstructionist role, that there will be tangible outcomes. The counter theory, though, is that given the fact that they stayed away from the ASEAN summit and given the fact that they're staying away from G20, this basically suggests that the G20's role as the preeminent global body for decision-making on economics itself, from here on, may be under question.
Yes, I agree. I think the G20 in many ways, it was a product of the global financial crisis, 2008, 2009. There was a strong consensus on the need for a new multilateral economic body to handle these type of crises, in particular the lack of China and other emerging economies like India inside the G7 format, which until then had taken that position. Now, if you look at the G20, it has struggled, however, to accomplish very much since then, after the original Pittsburgh summit. And now geopolitics, the new shifts in geopolitics in the international system, are making it even more difficult for it to function sensibly. It's a large organization, 20 countries. In theory, yes, they have some common economic agenda, but between the US versus China, China versus India, even, for example, in multilateral development bank reforms, it's been the Europeans who have been almost as difficult as China in trying about moving forward. So the divisions now within the G20, and the Ukraine war obviously has been the most obvious public example of this, is making it increasingly difficult. The politics of the world, if you wish, is infecting the ability of the G20 to work on economic issues. So what we will see, and I think what Dr. Chinoy mentioned, we'll see a fragmentation of the G20 after each summit. a coalition of the willing on one element of what's been agreed, even if all 20 countries aren't part of it, maybe a G14, a G8, and so on.
Andrew Lewing, sitting where you are in Beijing, can you share your sense of why Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, has decided not to come to India's G20? He went to Johannesburg for BRICS soon after, so it can't be his personal health. There are questions about whether this is to do with the health of the Chinese economy. Nikkei in Japan had a story about how this could possibly be to do with Chinese elders in the CCP pulling Xi Jinping up because they didn't think he was handling the economy and China well. Well, that's not confirmed by China, but that story came out in Japan and is being widely tracked in India. So what do you think explains the absence of the Chinese president?
Well, first of all, China is not boycotting the G20 or trying to snub India. China is sending its prime minister over. And in fact, both President Xi and President Modi met recently in the past. And I think that this staying away at the moment is because of the biggest elephant in the room, which is the major, anything short of war, a conflict between the United States and China. The United States is almost at war with China now, be it technology, the South China Sea, ideology, and then allying with its Western friends and trying to derail China's trajectory, let alone security of President Xi's person. Because don't forget that even though India is not 100% allied with the United States, but neither is India a good friend of China. So sending in the Prime Minister represents the best kind of option, a very calibrated approach. But it doesn't mean that China is not valuing the G20, because China is now, of course...
but there is a change in stance. So far, China was wanting to project, President Xi himself wanting to project the image of somebody who wanted to be a leader on the global stage, wanted to lead global multilateral fora, and he's attended every G20 except the one in Italy where, because of China's COVID lockdowns, he participated virtually. So this is a first. It's not common practice in the way that you're making it seem. It's a thought-out decision. Nothing happens by happenstance in China. This has been thought through. The question is why? You're saying it's more to do with the rancor with the United States than to do with the current economic and military deadlock with India?
Well, I think the biggest problem highlighted, of course, is the world is changing fast. It's no longer a U.S. hegemonic kind of order, but it's lending itself to more multipolar kind of approach to global problems. And China, of course, has seen its influence growing. G20 is not everything, even though it's a very important platform. But look at the recent the BRICS summit. Many countries are allying and trying to sign up for the BRICS, and of course, China has an outsized influence on the BRICS and in the global South. So there is no need for President Xi to take on unnecessary risk in attending the G20 himself.
Well, what's the risk? I'm sorry, he's not going to Pakistan or Afghanistan or to Syria. What's the risk? I'm sorry, Andrew Lewing, I don't understand. What's the risk you talk about? He's not going to the back of beyond, he's coming to the capital of India.
I know. But as I was saying that there was China is almost at war, or the United States is almost at war with China. And I think that sending in the Prime Minister is a very, very good compromise. I think that apart from the fact that, of course, China has got a lot of internal issues to attend to, but it doesn't mean, as I was saying, that President Xi is trying to...
So you're saying part of it is to do with the economic distress in China, the fact that Country Garden, the real estate company, almost went bankrupt on the back of what happened with Evergrande, youth unemployment at 21%. After that, the data goes black. So all these signals of economic distress are part of the reason that Xi needs to stay home and try and fix the mess in the Chinese economy?
Well, it is a combination of many factors. It's not just one single factor. I think the president's decision of not attending the G20 in person is very carefully considered, calculated approach. On the one hand, it preserves China's influence in the G20, because don't forget, a great deal of the global South have China as the center of gravity as well, as far as on the economic front. But and as I said, as exemplified by the recent BRICS summit, China still have a great deal of influence. This kind of influence is unlikely to be changed by his absence, personal absence in the G20, while he's represented by his Prime Minister.
Mohan Kumar, from what I pick out, this reflects a bit of an emperor mindset. Go to BRICS because you set the agenda, you can expand the BRICS, bring more countries on board. Don't come to the G20 because this is more of a dialogue between equals. President Biden could ask some tough questions. Leaders of European countries could ask some uncomfortable questions. So stay away. Lead where you can, where you are Lord and Master, or at least try and be Lord and Master, and don't come to a place where you can be asked uncomfortable questions. How do you respond to the suggestion that came from Beijing, where Andrew Luing seems to suggest that this is to do with his safety, that he much rather decided to stay away?
Thank you for having me. I think I agree with the China strategist on your show that there is a combination of factors at work here. I don't think it's got to do with India. It's ironical that the Chinese strategist on your show and the External Affairs Minister both agree that Xi Jinping staying away has nothing to do with India. I think what's happened to G20 is that 5 years ago, you could have said it's the economy stupid. Today, you have to say it is the geopolitics stupid. So I agree with you to the extent that I think China is more comfortable in fora like the BRICS. I think the US-China relationship has much more to do with Xi Jinping not showing up in Delhi. There are also uncomfortable questions about Chinese support to Russia. And of course, you will have some press person from India putting a mic in Xi Jinping's face and saying, why are you doing things at the border that we don't like? So a combination of factors, but you have to say that the Prime Minister of China is, I think, a plenipotentiary representative. So to that extent, I agree with my colleagues who have said that. I think the last point I want to make is don't judge the G20 summit on the basis of 2 or 3 paragraphs which have to do with Ukraine, which will be described as the chair's summary. If out of 50 paragraphs, 47 paragraphs are an outcome document, the document takes into account SDGs, the document takes into account climate change, the document deals with the debt problem, and we need Chinese cooperation there. We have a good paragraph on digital public infrastructure, and you have one on food security. I think India will walk away with tremendous honors because it has set itself up with one overriding objective, which is to be the voice of the global South. So these are the issues I would look for, not those 2 paragraphs.
Mohan Kumar, can I ask you this question? When it comes to being voice of the global South, China has been wanting to project itself as the leader of the global South over the past several decades, making deep inroads with countries in Africa and elsewhere through the Belt and Road Initiative and a lot of the money and infrastructure spends that China has done. Is that going to lead to an inevitable contestation between India and China? India wanting to be the voice of the global South and China thinking of itself as the natural leader of the global South?
May I answer, Rahul, by just saying the following? Give me 1 minute. You can say China is a big creditor. You can say China is a big partner of the global South. China can be a project assistance lender. China cannot be a leader for the simple reason I consider China as an upper middle income country with a 14 trillion economy. It does not belong to the global South. It can be a partner to the global South. So I really think you have to belong to the global South in order to be a leader. And I would contend that it is India which can fill that role.
Craig Kafura, President Biden had a COVID scare, his wife testing positive. I'm told from what we heard from the spokesperson in the White House that he'll have to follow COVID protocols, which potentially means he may have a mask on for some of these meetings, may prefer to stay outdoors, etc. So how does that impact? He's staying over in Germany en route to India. Does this play any role at all, or do you think he'll be as raring to go as is possible despite what happened with his wife getting COVID?
I don't think it's going to affect him at all. And I think if you listen to what he has said and what National Security Advisor Sullivan has said in the days leading up to the G20, I think you're absolutely right that the focus of their approach is not going to be on Ukraine or on bilateral issues with China. They'll deal with those in other fora. The focus of the United States coming into this summit seems to be firmly fixed on those issues of development, and especially development in the global south. The U.S. says that it warmly welcomes this proposal of permanent membership for the African Union, and the Biden administration is trying to, as they say, fundamentally reshape some of the institutions that it has used for the last several decades, like the World Bank and the IMF. I think the real question will be, how much room is there to modify those organizations in a way that satisfies all parties at the table? One of the challenges with the G20 has always been that you have a lot of voices in the room who all have a lot of different interests at stake in these institutions. That's what makes statements on substantive issues very difficult.
What's your reading of the absence of the Chinese president and the fact that the Chinese Prime Minister is the one who will be representing China during the G20?
Well, I agree with your previous guests. I think Li Keqiang is perfectly able to represent China. Xi's absence is a little harder to read, and you do have these conflicting explanations about why that might be. I'm not sure it's an issue of, seat voters pulling things, but I do think there might be something to your view of this as not wanting to be in an institution where he's going to be maybe harassed by journalists, where he's not going to have that leadership role that he's able to step into in something like the BRICS Plus Summit, where when the media reports back home, they want to be able to report pages and pages of Xi Jinping leading the world, not Xi Jinping, one among others, not necessarily in that leadership role that he so clearly desires. The real question, I think, will be, does he attend the APEC summit in San Francisco this November? If he attends that meeting, then okay, whatever is happening at home, whatever kept him out of the G20, we can put aside. If he does not attend the APEC summit in November in San Francisco, then I think we have to ask real questions about what's keeping him from attending these meetings. Because although Li Keqiang can represent China, Xi Jinping is very clearly the man in charge in China. There will be an effect, I think, on China's ability to fully represent and fully commit to things without Xi Jinping's personal stamp on some of these issues.
Pramit Pral Chaudhary, weigh in on this emperor mindset commentary that we are seeing, that Xi now sees himself as emperor of China, wants to be treated as emperor of what he considers is now a genuine, true global superpower, and therefore will come to BRICS where he thinks he can be lord and master, but will not come to G20 where he's important but not first amongst equals.
Well, I think what we are definitely seeing with China is an attempt to create an alternate international order, if you wish. So it's very clear, I think, from what India and China in their clashes, for example, within the BRICS, with Brazil and India on one side and Russia and China on the other. Unusually, South Africa decided to defect to the Russian camp and the Chinese camp in this last BRICS, where China has basically said we want to convert the BRICS into a G7, a non-Western G7 grouping, but with a very clear anti-Western rhetoric inside it. Within it, it's already trying to do that within the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where India is a reasonably minor player, and obviously it's facing some resistance. I think India, in many ways, is probably the most strongly resistant among the emerging economies to this idea, though Brazil not far behind. In the G20, you have a situation where, if you look at it, roughly 10 members are anti-Chinese or anti-Russian, especially over the Ukraine issue. The other another eight are trying to leverage the differences between Russia and China and the other 10 to get something for themselves. So for Xi, I think it looks at it and he says, this is not an organization that, well, yes, I'll be a member of it, and I will try to ensure that it doesn't affect Chinese interests too much, but it's not an organization I wish to invest too much in. The question, I think, for him will be what type of an alternative to G20 would China have in mind over time? But I think it's right now it doesn't have an idea, but it will at some point.
Sujan Chinoy, how should the success of the G20 be judged? For those watching, given the very clear fact that there are tensions amongst these countries over the Russia-Ukraine war, there is lack of consensus on that. So keeping that aside, when you look at the outcome document, give your sense to our viewers about how the success of the G20 should be judged.
Look, if I were to put on my hat as the Think 20 chair for India's G20 presidency, let me tell you straight away that there is a lot more consensus out there among the academicians, among the experts, among the civil society organizations than there may be at the level of governments. And mind you, all these global challenges that we are speaking of, whether it's food, fuel, fertilizer, finance, these are not going to be tackled, nor is climate change going to be tackled simply by governments. You require the people of the world, the experts around the world to collaborate. And we have seen in the Think 20 much greater consensus. So I'm very hopeful. I wouldn't judge the G20 presidency simply on the basis of an outcome document or a couple of paragraphs there. As I said at the beginning, it's a year-long effort. India has succeeded in putting a spotlight on key issues, and that's what counts. That's the legacy that we're going to hand over to the next presidency. But may I just chip in here with a couple of other important points? You see, it's also in the interest of the United States, especially when President Biden flies all the way to New Delhi, to ensure that there will be some kind of consensus. So I see President Biden also doing a little bit of heavy lifting during his presence here to ensure a successful outcome. It's not in the US interest to see that India's G20 presidency is maligned by those that doubt its success. Number two, the fact that the Chinese premier will be here is not to be underestimated. Before Prime Minister Modi took over as the Prime Minister of India, mind you, the Chinese always engaged the Prime Minister of India at the level of the premier, not at the level of the president. It's only Mr. Modi who has been engaged at the level of the president. And the third point I'd like to make is that it's not in China's interest to see the G20 fail completely, because sooner or later, as is wont with these musical chairs, it's going to come around to China's turn as well. And it's not in China's character to abandon any global space or any major framework. The G20 is far too important to China, and it will become even more important with the induction of the African Union. So mind you, China is not going to walk away from the G20. And I think we are also highly overrating the chances of the BRICS emerging as some kind of great alternative to the G20. Look, India is in the BRICS.
Not as an alternative to the G20. The question is, can it be a Chinese alternative to the G7?
No, it cannot. Because if you look at the economies there, especially the new ones that have come in, and take just Ethiopia, for example, it's not going to be like the G20. Moreover, India is a member. India is not going to play ball with those that are seeking to have a contestation through the BRICS or make the BRICS a China-led organization. India will not permit that. So we have to keep in mind that China will ride the old order because the old order benefits China. That's precisely what has given China a chance to rise to where it is. It is also creating parallel structures where it can, in their own likeness, have some advancement of their goals and objectives. But I don't see the BRICS as a formidable institution that will take on the work of the G20. It cannot.
We'll keep tracking what happens once these world leaders come to India. Some of the leaders who've been invited as special invitees to the G20 are here. They've started speaking to India today. I want to bring you excerpts from an interview with Pravind Jugnauth, the Prime Minister of Mauritius, the first head of government to speak to India today, to speak to any Indian media. Here is our Foreign Affairs editor Geeta Mohan in an exclusive conversation with the Mauritian Prime Minister.
As a guest country, what does Mauritius, which is strategically located, achieve from the summit, and what do you hope to achieve from the summit?
Well, let me first of all thank the government of India and particularly Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji for the invitation. It is, of course, the first time that Mauritius is participating to a G20 Heads of State Summit. And of course, it is a great honor and privilege. We are looking forward to constructively engage with G20 members in order to foster global cooperation and see that the challenges that we face, particularly as a small island state, are in fact addressed. I think everyone can draw lessons from the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic that we have been facing, and not only in terms of affecting the health of the population, but its consequences on the world economy. And this has been aggravated now by the conflict in Ukraine. And also we see that climate change, for example, are affecting all countries. So we are at a juncture where I think this summit comes at a very opportune time for us to draw lessons from what has happened, what is happening, and to see how we can work together to make the global economy more resilient, inclusive, and of course sustainable. So this is the approach of Mauritius.
Prime Minister, sir, the fact that African Union to be included as a member of the G20 is an initiative and a proposal that has been put forth by India. What do you have to say? How do you look at the admission, if at all it happens in this summit, of African Union as part of the G20?
I must say I'm very appreciative of the initiative of Prime Minister Modi, because Africa is a huge continent of maybe more than 1.3 billion people, so many countries, and yet we are not part of so many of the groupings. And I think G20, which consists of so many important members and which forms part of major economies where policies are in fact decided, because we know when you have a majority of the major economies getting together, they set normally the trend. And I think Africa has to be part of it in order to be able to voice out the views of not only Africa, but of those whose voices are not normally heard at those instances. So I am obviously very supportive of the fact that this initiative is on the table, and I hope that Africa would eventually become a member.
Personally, as the Prime Minister of Mauritius, do you think you would want to bid as Mauritius as a country to be a member of the G20 separately?
Well, this is an issue that has to be discussed, first of all, at government level. And so we have to take time, and of course we will consider, but as it is today, there is no stand that has been taken with regard to that.
On a lighter note, if I could ask you, you're of Indian origin. Do you or your family, does anybody watch Hindi films or Indian cinema? What's your favorite film or favorite song, if you have any?
Well, the song Bharat Ka Rane Wala Hu by Mahendra Kapoor in the film of Pura Barpachin, I think is very appropriate right now.
Okay, that's
and
nice.
Yes, I do, of course, I do listen to a number of songs from time to time, but I won't say that there is one particular favorite. But you know, Mauritians are very fond of Indian movies, and they have been watching Singham series. And I had the pleasure of meeting Rohit Shetty when he came to Mauritius, because he is now planning to shoot the next series of Singham in Mauritius.
And who are the stars? Are they big
with the stars, there are stars coming to Mauritius, but I think I will leave him to then, publicly say who are the stars who are coming. But again, this is going to put Mauritius on the map in terms of publicity. And I hope that this will attract Indians to come and visit Mauritius.
He picked up a very important song, भारत का रहने वाला हूँ, भारत की बात सुनाता हूँ. आज G20 summit हो रहा है और भारत की बात सुनाने वाला है. With the projection of India that you'd be seeing, India is going to be on the global map when it comes to the G20 summit and how India is hosting the G20 summit. On that note, sir, thank you so much for joining us here on India Today.
Thank you, and if I can say, भारत की हार्दिक स्वागत के लिए बहुत धन्यवाद.
You're on board the NewsTrack. The Sanatan showdown is getting bigger. After Udayanidhi Stalin, DMK MP A. Raja has compared the Sanatan Dharma to HIV and leprosy. The BJP is up in arms and is demanding an apology from the opposition alliance.
This remark against the Sanatana Dharma by the Tamil Nadu minister and Chief Minister M.K. Stalin's son Udayanidhi Stalin has been triggering a massive showdown for the last 5 days. The DMK is not backing down despite the severe backlash from the BJP. The Dravidian party's Dalit face A. Raja, former minister in the UPA government, has scaled up the attack on Sanatana Dharma now.
உதயநிதி ஸ்டாலின் அவர்கள் மென்மையாகத்தான் சொன்னார். மலேரியா போல டெங்கு போல ஒழிக்க வேண்டும் என்று. மலேரியாவுக்கும் டெங்குக்கும் சோசியல் ஸ்டிக்மா இல்ல. அது ஒரு அருவருப்பா சமூகம் பார்க்காது. அருவருவாக பார்க்கிற ஒரு சனாதனத்தை சொல்லணும்னா முறைப்படி ஒரு காலத்துல தொழுநோய் இருந்தது. இப்ப HIV இருந்தது. எங்களை பொறுத்தவரை HIV தொழுநோயை போல HIV போல சமூக அவலம் நிறைந்த ஒரு நோயாகத்தான் நாம் பார்க்கிறோம். ஒன்று.
The BJP is raising the heat and has questioned the silence of the Gandhis on the comments made by their close allies.
आपकी कांग्रेस पार्टी को क्या हो गया है? हिंदू आस्था, हिंदू विश्वास, सनातन धर्म, सबों का अपमान. तो सुन ले सोनिया जी, हिंदू आस्था, हिंदू चिंतन का अपमान नहीं सहेगा हिंदुस्तान.
कुछ ऐसे लोग हैं जो हमारे सनातन धर्म को चुनौती देते हैं कि नेस्तो नाबूद कर देंगे. जब तक एक एक भक्त इस पुण्य धरती पर जीवित है, तब तक कोई ऐसा नहीं जो धर्म को चुनौती दे, कोई ऐसा नहीं जो आस्था को चुनौती दे.
सनातन इन तुच्छ सत्ता परजीवी जीवों से क्या मिल पाएगा? आज इनको स्वयं अपने कृत्यों पर लज्जित होना चाहिए.
The BJP's fierce counterattack comes a day after the Prime Minister asked union ministers to fight falsehoods and attacks on issues of faith. A Tamil Nadu BJP delegation met with Governor R.N. Ravi on Thursday and sought his intervention over Udayanidhi Stalin's hate speech. DMK leaders, however, are defiant.
The Honorable President Draupadi Murmu, madam, she was not invited for the opening of the parliament. Right. That is the best current example. Thank you.
No question of apology.
Somebody is apologizing to me?
They demanded your apology.
No, sorry. I can. This is not an apology to them. This is for your question. Thank you so much.
DMK Supremo and Tamil Nadu Chief Minister M.K. Stalin has accused the BJP of twisting his son's remark. Nearly a week after the comments first triggered a big political war, what appears absolutely clear is that the fight over Sanatana Dharma is all set to be a big political issue going into 2024. With Pramod Madhav in Chennai, Bureau Report, India Today.
This is where we wrap up the NewsTrack tonight. For your time and your trust, thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning. We'll be tracking the arrival of all the leaders as they start coming in from early in the morning, going into late into the night. Our teams are on the ground. We're tracking the G20 summit like absolutely no other network is. You can catch the best ringside view by staying tuned to India Today. Goodbye. Good night.